All right, I think we're finally ready to begin. Sorry for the bit of delay getting all the technology pieces connected, but I think we are connected now. Joining us in person, Ms. Carter, Ms. Cash, Mr. Haggerty, and myself, Jim Martin, and remotely, board member Scott is also online, and I'll keep a lookout for others who are joining us. We've got a number of things on the agenda today. We begin, obviously, with approving the minutes to our last meeting. Ms. Cash?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed, same sign. The minutes are passed. Today, we have before us a continued discussion regarding the draft prioritization, the CIP follow-up, and our goal is to get to the final review of the CIP recommendations going forward. Whenever there are more needs than there are funds to accomplish the work that needs to be done, we see there's a lot of tension that gets created. You know, how do we prioritize this project over that project? And, you know, I think it's important for us to begin recognizing that with our 200 schools that we have and our buildings being built for a 40-year lifetime, do that math, that means we should be doing 5 major renovations a year. And if we're not doing 5 major renovations a year, then this idea of a 40-year lifetime is a mythology. Right? If we're assuming a 50-year lifespan, then we need to be doing 4 a year. So as we talked about at our work session, at our prior meetings, we really do not have enough renovations in our plan. And we run up with all the time, we've got to work within the county's debt limit. And I understand that. But there's something that's more immovable than the county's debt limit. And that's called the aging of facilities. Weather, corrosion, wear and tear. Those things are going to be there. They're not going to change. So we can talk about debt limit till we're blue in the face, but I'll tell you who's going to win: aging, corrosion, and all of that. So what we do today is we're doing our best, working within the parameters that we have to work with. But until we get to a stage where we're renovating 4 to 5 schools a year, we're getting further and further behind. That's a little bit of sobering context that I think we need at the beginning of this discussion, because staff worked hard since our last meeting and is going to come back to us with a few more renovation possibilities to try to work into the planning. But know that their hands too are tied. The list of needs is way longer than we're going to be able to cover. And we're all going to be able to look at schools and say, this school has all these needs. And you know what? It's absolutely true, and it needs to be renovated. And somebody else is going to say, this school has all these needs, and it needs to be renovated. Absolutely true. Whatever schools get on the list today are going to need renovations. The schools that don't get on the list are going to need renovations. If we're not doing 4 to 5 a year, we're falling behind. The other thing that we need to recognize, and we're going to hear that there's going to be some changes in a few numbers. And I recognize, because of a variety of conversations that I've had, that if numbers change, it can often feel like there's a black box. Why did the numbers change? Is somebody playing some games behind the scene? What I want us to emphasize, right, my life is spent working with numbers an awful lot. What I want us to recognize is, while we have a list 1 through 25, we changed the prioritization rubric so we don't just look at this linear trend, 1 through 25, because the differences between our schools are not linear, right? The old ranking that we had 3-ish years ago literally did that and said, hey, we've got these schools 1 through 25. I think we actually did 1 through 17, and said, here's the list, top priority, last priority. But with our new prioritization rubric, if you look at all the data, you see what we call a sigmoid curve. It drops, it plateaus, and it drops again. If you've got your list of schools on the plateau, which based on the data that we have provided, about 15 of our schools are in that plateau. The width of that plateau is only 10% of our whole scale. We have 4 schools, and I haven't seen the new and adjusted numbers, so that there will be a little bit of a tweak to this. But we have 4 schools that clearly, based on the rubric, have a higher need. Then we have a jump, and we have 5 schools that are equivalent until you get to the second decimal place of our ranking. That means if you take significant figures and you round it up to just 1 decimal place, the second group of 5 are equivalent. And yet they are going to be listed as 5 through 9. But what I need people to understand, not just we need people to understand, is that 5 through 9 are absolutely equivalent. And now if you go all the way down to, I think it's 22 out of our 25 schools, you've only got a half a point variation, which means there really is almost no variation. So as our very thorough and equipped facilities team goes and looks at these numbers, I don't expect that list of 1 through 25 to stay fixed. If it does stay fixed, that's when we say, hey, there's something fishy. I'm not sure I trust that you're doing your work. I preface that because I know that we're going to see a little bit of shuffle today. And I want people to understand that that little bit of shuffle tells us that this team is trustworthy because they're looking at those numbers, and a change of 0.1% in one of those numbers might change something from 10 to 5. Might change the number right in our ranking even more than that. So I give those kind of preface comments as we begin this work today to recognize that based on the information we have, and don't get me wrong, there's more information that will be useful to sort of understand whys, right? Why does this get prioritized over this? By the way, we can't give all of that information because some of it is going to tell you about the vulnerabilities of a campus. And the last thing that we can do is publicize the vulnerabilities of a campus. That's why our safety plans are even closed session material. So we can't give a list of all the whys. Are more whys helpful? Absolutely. As we look at one school versus another school, we clearly are going to need some information, but we also have to recognize that we can't know all of that information because some of it really needs to be confidential to protect the safety of the children and the staff at that school. So today, ask those hard questions. We need to prioritize, but let's also recognize that that's partly why we have professional staff to go in, to do the hard work, to do some of that evaluation. We all can look at schools and say, this is absolutely in need of repair, and we're going to go to another one. This is absolutely in need of repair. All of that is correct. But we're going to get, I think we're going to get an increasing number of renovations in the plan. That's exciting to me. But just know it's messy, and it's not going to be everything that we know that we need. All right, I'll stop there, but I wanted to give that preface because I've worked with this team. They're working hard, and we want to hear their work. So let me turn it over to Douglas and Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Mark.
It is now, thank you. And then, of course, we will discuss next steps. Next slide, please. What we would like to do in this, next slide, please. Why is this not advancing? There we go. In this slide, what we'd like to do is take just a moment to focus on the key collaboration that takes place between our internal team and our key county partner. These are CIP committee members that are meeting every 2 weeks during the most important part of our CIP season, and it's important to stress that there's key collaboration and work, good work that's going on amongst them. Next slide, please. In this slide, we'd like to take a couple of moments and just focus on the schedule that we've been discussing for the last 4 months. This hits on the key points, the parts and pieces of our plan, the things that we've been sharing with you over the course of those months, our student enrollment, of course, program assumptions, standards and guidelines, the school prioritization, cost model, and ultimately where we will be very soon asking for your approval. Next slide, please. In this slide, what we'd like to do is take just a moment or two and discuss the history, the key components of our prioritization rubric. Remember that we have 4 pieces to that scoring rubric. And in that regard, we have the following. We have campus building condition, which is scored respectively at 40%. Health and safety at 35, school choice at 15, and educational adequacy at 10%.
And let's just go ahead and remind people that we talked about before. It's school choice, planning, and assignment. So school choice is just the catch-all, but it's much bigger than just choice.
Right. Next slide, please. What we've shown in this slide is a rundown of all these key steps that we've taken over the course of these several months with you, starting with the month of February when we came and we reviewed the space standards and legs. We reviewed the program assumptions and student enrollment. We also shared that first cost model with you in that February meeting. We then came back and discussed the executive summary at the board work session last week. Well, we also spent time giving you that first update to the prioritization last Tuesday. Here, of course, with you all today to discuss the process and where we've arrived, and then ultimately with the understanding seeking final approval for this year's CIP at the April 19 meeting. Next slide, please. In this, what we've done is we've summarized the program assumptions slide. This reminds you certainly that we had technology devices, safety and security, and trailers. Those were the 4 sections of our program assumptions that we updated you this year, and that you approved the following changes / modifications. The reference sections are certainly noted here. We won't go into detail about the specificity of each one, but that is a summary, in short, of what was approved going back to the February meeting. Next slide, please. In this slide, we talk about the program standards, the legs, and the guidelines. We talk about the fact that in this year, 2022, there were no recommended material changes to these CIP documents, which is good news. Ultimately, no changes equaling no cost impacts to this year's CIP. Next slide, please. Feedback received from last week. So what coming out of our meeting last Tuesday, these were the high points that we heard from you all. Number 1, consensus that the ultimate decision needs to be focused on data. Number 2, a recommendation that there be more major renovation projects found within our 7-year plan. Number 3, recommendation that a high school major renovation be located within our 7-year rolling CIP plan. Greater balance amongst our 7-year CIP plan, trying to do our best to find major renovation projects in the out years. And then ultimately, Dr. Martin's point that we find a time later this year in 2022 to schedule a visit with some of our older schools in the district that are in need of major renovation to add a bit of appreciation for what's happening out in the district. Next slide, please. So in this slide, what you'll see is option 1A. In option 1A, this is what we discussed last week. And in that, we have our major renovations, and we also have new construction. You'll note going top to bottom, we have North Garner Middle School, we have Lockhart Elementary School, Brentwood Elementary School. We were able to bring in a high school slot. Our two highest ranking high schools were both Cary High School and Athens Drive High School. We have Briarcliff Elementary School, Washington Elementary School, Ligon Middle School, and Zebulon Middle School. In the new construction category, we're showing HS3, which, as you know, is already in our 7-year plan. We're also showing the Wendell Zebulon area, which, as you know, is one of the key areas of need that was noted of future growth. We're happy to report that the recommendation would be to build a new school in that area in Zebulon and then ultimately take the existing population from that school and move them into the new Wendell Elementary School. Important to note, too, as you'll recall from last week, if the acronym TBA is assigned to a respective line under the new construction, land does need to be acquired. So just keep that in mind. We have our Pool Road site, of course, which we do control, which is listed as TB2. TBD number 3 is in northeastern Raleigh, and again, would require acquisition of land. And again, this is option 1A. So this would be coming out of last week, hearing your feedback, and arriving in option 1A. Next slide, please. So in option 1B, you will see many of the same schools, with the only differences being the following. You will note, you will see Adams Elementary School, and you will also see Oberlin Middle School, noting that the data was very close in that scoring. And what we're sharing with you in 1B is that because of that scoring being very close, there is an option out there. We are here to share with you a couple things. Number one, with respect to Zebulon Middle School, as you know, Zebulon Middle School is in the eastern part of our district. One of the key pieces of feedback that we heard from Ms. Scott last week was the needs that are out there in that eastern part of the district. And we're happy to report, as I noted a couple of minutes ago, with respect to Wendell Elementary School, I'm sure she'd be pleased to hear that. Our recommendation would be Zebulon Middle School, as that helps to provide greater balance across our district. With respect to Adams and Washington, again, close, but looking at that and looking at the spectrum across the board, the recommendation would be Washington Elementary School. And then lastly, again, very close scoring in our high school slot, a lot of consideration given to both, given the fact ultimately that Athens Drive High School is a magnet school as well. Recommendation being Athens Drive High School in that particular slot. Next slide, please. So what we've done in this slide is we'd like to take what we've just discussed in 1A and provide a visual. So what we have ultimately done, per comment received last week from you all, is we have moved 3 project line items from the new construction section of our 7-year CIP, and we have been able to increase the total of major renovations by 3. Staff went back last week and looked closely at North Garner Middle School as an example. As you're aware, North Garner Middle School is in need. They're high on our list. Happy to report that staff has been able to look at that closer, and we're ultimately able to lay out a new renovated school on that campus. We're able to increase it to a large middle school, and in addition to all the customary amenities that our middle schools have, we're also able to fit a track on that campus, which that school does not currently have. Good news to share. So that's one of our adds in the major renos. We've also added the high school, which I've indicated, and then, of course, Zebulon Middle School being the third add. So you receive ultimately a net add of 3 in the major reno category, which, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, was one of the most important pieces of feedback comment that we received last week. And I'll pause at this moment on this slide and ask if there are any questions at this point.
Thank you for the hard work for that addition. I look forward to seeing how it fits into the cost model. Are there questions and comments? Ms. Carter.
All right, it's more, I guess, of comments. So are you recommending 1A? Is that what I'm hearing, the option that you're recommending?
So our recommendation would be 1A, which would include the high school slot of Athens Drive High School.
Okay. And I guess I'll come back. I know people attack me for this, but I'll come back for Cary High and just say, I understand that, and you mentioned Athens is a magnet school. And I hear that if you look at their scores, and I don't know if any of that, I know there were some adjustments, but I don't believe not to those, correct? That were on our top 25, did any of
Right,
those?
so when we talk about those two schools in particular, the scoring difference was 1/10 of 1 point.
Right, and when you break it down and look at each category, I'm trying my best here, but it's on the on the screen and not in front of me. It looks like Cary High School has higher numbers, including for health and higher numbers, including for health and safety. It's just a school choice is the difference between those schools. Am I missing something?
No, you're not. The difference is the school choice component.
Okay.
Douglas,
Okay.
just to clarify, the choice is not is it just about the magnet, or is it also about growth in the area? Is it the planning and the future stuff also?
No, you're right. Thank you, Superintendent Moore. So magnet is certainly one component, but it is, in fact, there's some other criteria with respect to anticipated growth in the area and other planning reasons that the recommendation came in with Athens Drive High School.
Okay, but with the higher health and safety score, that would mean then there's more safety and health concerns at Cary High versus Athens? Is that correct?
Yes, so
Okay. So that's, I guess, my concern.
it does have a higher score on that component. You're right.
Yeah, on everything except for school choice. That is the only one I can see the difference on. So I'll just, again, voice my concern. Yes, I'm a broken drum over that, because health and safety, I feel like, is something that should be definitely considered. And I know you are, but I respect the decisions you've made, but that's just, I have to speak up. So, and I do, because when I'm looking at Adams, because in my district, but when I started looking at the difference in the health and safety between Adams and Washington, then Washington. So, I can appreciate that there, but I'll just voice that.
So to that point, which I think is absolutely a valid and appropriate point, and this is in part why I've been working to try to get us to have a field trip, because I think it would be very useful for us to see what goes into the numbers. This is just like assigning grades, right? When I assign grades, I have my fixed rubric, which if you make those numbers, that's the grade. But I look at how the students learn, participate, engage, is there progress over time? The final grade does not necessarily fit to that strict rubric. So I wondered if you could comment a little bit without going into details that would give any safety concern, can you comment on any details, right? I mean, is health and safety because of fire alarms, because of mold, because of window casings?
Sure. So that's sort of a slippery slope, but to
It's
try to
very much a
give,
slippery slope. That's why I'm saying don't go down too far,
Sure.
but can you put it at all in context? Because
Right.
the difference in the numbers, again, is small.
yes.
There is a difference in the priority ranking, yes,
Right.
but they're really pretty close together. So I
Right. So I
don't
think
want to go
if
too far down the slope, but a little bit.
I'll go a little bit, okay, if
Would
that's
help.
fair. So we look at things certainly like hazmat-related items like mold, like lead-based paint, like other things that are components that were, there was a time, as we all know, that those materials were allowable in buildings and in schools, and then they were not. However, it takes time because they get grandfathered in, and then we need to address them over time. With respect to safety, we're talking about things, again, not trying to get into too much detail, but making sure that our main entrances are appropriate, that everything is secure, that given the age of the facility has not been compromised. Not sure if I'm answering your question, but I'm trying.
Well, is there, and I'm not saying that there is there a way to put the right, to help us make the decision, right? Is there a way to put the Cary versus Athens in context? I mean, I think we all want to trust, I don't think the board wants to get into the micromanaging staff's recommendation.
Sure.
But we clearly have constituencies that are going to hear stuff and say, well, why this over that? So is there any language that can help?
Sure. So one of the pieces that the consultant that was engaged this year did differently than previous years. Previous years, they were only evaluating over a 10-year life cycle what they thought would need to be repaired or / replaced. Okay? This year, we brought in a third-party consultant who is an expert in this area of evaluation. They physically went out to each site, to each campus, walked those buildings and those campuses to put their eyes not only on the buildings but on the actual equipment to see how well is the equipment running. What does the condition of the equipment actually look like? Not just, it's 13 years old and it should be doing this. This is, if I'm that analyst, if I'm that consultant in the field, this is what I'm actually seeing. And I'm actually watching it being performed live and in person. So looking at that, I would also comment that there are some schools that may have a need that certainly gives the appearance that it's great. However, that piece of the school could be smaller in greater need than the whole when the whole school is evaluated. Whereas another school may appear like the need's not as great, but a higher percentage of the school is in need. So when they run their numbers and they run their calcs, more emphasis is given ultimately to significant attention, things that are really, truly in need. Does that help provide some more detail?
Does that help any, Ms. Carter?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I did want to circle back because I forgot to say thank you for, because I had mentioned at the last meeting that major renos funded prior to 2022 and recently completed, I'm looking at it now, there were 7 in Raleigh, and this time there's a lot more diversity in the location in these options. So I just want to appreciate that to help address more areas of our district. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carter.
Ms. Cash?
I love this program. It's my favorite thing to work with, between that and student assignment. And I think, Dr. Martin, you did an excellent summation for this and a great introduction into this, because we need to be totally aware of what is facing us to stay up. I accept the recommendation. I think you've put a lot of thought into it, and I am glad that we've looked at a few of the obstacles in Eastern Wake that they're facing, especially at Zebulon Middle School, for the competition that they have outside of the school system versus inside the school system. And I don't know much about the high schools, and I respect Ms. Carter's approach on that as well. I had one question about Athens Drive, and I do think it's a great magnet program that we need to continue to take care of. If we were going to design Athens Drive and do that school, I know it's not really got an increase in capacity probably slated for it, but could it be reevaluated with possibly an increase in capacity so that we don't lose magnet seats, but we possibly could add some capacity to that school?
So the answer to your question, as I reached out early after you and I had talked about this earlier today, we don't think the need is there right now to add capacity, but staff is certainly keeping a close eye on that. And if staff feels like they need to come back to you all and recommend increased capacity for that particular school, they will absolutely do that.
So when they look at the capacity, and I know Mr. Carozzo's here, are they looking at the fact that it could take extra applications from other areas that have crowding to add more magnet seats? I mean, I'm not looking at you directly, Mr. Carozzo, that you have to answer this right now, but
So, looking at Athens Drive,
I'm sorry.
looking at Athens Drive as an application school, which is open to the entire district, yes, it would give us the opportunity to provide relief to some of our more crowded schools, particularly in Western Wake, by increasing the number of magnet seats available.
Well,
okay,
and-
so we would consider that then, that we might need increased capacity in that school if we could build it in.
Certainly.
Okay.
Well, and I would assume, I mean, Athens has a large number of trailers. And I would assume that we would be increasing the capacity to meet the current trailer capacity rather than the current permanent capacity. Is that a correct assumption?
Or both.
I would think we would want to do that.
I mean, I agree with you, Ms. Cash, that we could increase it beyond that. But right now, the physical building for Athens is actually a very small high school. And it's got a lot of very old trailers that even if we can bring it up to a normal capacity instead of a large capacity high school, we're going to do some of what you're talking about.
Dr. Warren, I think it's a very good point. Quite frankly, given the crowding that we have in high schools across the district, period, looking at additional capacity is always something we should pay attention to. And I say that as a principal of a 1,600 student school, fully renovated to 1,600 in 2000. And then the district's specs went up, and we were struggling with 2,000 kids and modular units and stuff immediately. And they're a little bit further down now, but I just think that there's space for that conversation. And it's also provides flexibility as we look at not just magnet seats, but assignment patterns also. So we'll look at it.
Ms. Scott has her hand up. Yeah, unless you were on to this.
It was the same thing.
Continuing? Okay, so we're going to continue that. Go ahead, continue, and Ms. Scott, you are up next, but Ms. Tragerty.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the direction that we've gone in, because those were some of the same concerns that I had that Ms. Cash and the superintendent also addressed. I know that a lot of work went into this, and that you've brought back in your recommendation is option 1A. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, I know that on the board, we've talked an awful lot about just the need to try to make some progress in the area of renovations. And when you have to choose between renovations and new capacity, it's a tough choice because we need both, right? There are things in option 1 that I would love to see and I would love to support. I understand the reasons for going for the reorganization toward the major renovations. But what I'd like to ask is, based on some of these questions that we've raised about capacity, as we look at our rubric, as Dr. Martin said, if it's set in stone, then sometimes you're kind of locked into your decisions even if conditions change. And so that as we look to maybe grow and evolve the rubric in the future, could we look to maybe how we balance some of those scores, the priorities in some of those scores? As Ms. Carter said, she had looked at health and safety, and for her, that was like a higher priority, right? And I think with some of our capacity needs, what we're calling school choice, but is school choice, is utilization, may also be capacity. that might be something we want to weight a little higher in the future if we're unable to meet our growth. Because if, as Ms. Cash and the superintendent had talked about, if we have the potential to add capacity with renovation, right, that's something in choosing between two potential renovation projects we should take a look at. I think in this scenario between Cary High and Athens Drive High, I understand and I respect the scoring that suggests Athens Drive, but I also know that if renovation had more capacity to Cary High School, as Western Wake grows and we look to address crowding, then with not even magnet schools or choice options, but just even with reassignment, Cary High School could accommodate more students, and that might give us a little relief from some of the pressure out there. And the same thing is true where if we can get one of the new elementary schools, you know, in Apex or Morrisville and Cary that was in option one, you know, built in the future, right, that can be swing space that could then allow for more renovation of those Cary and Apex and Morrisville elementary schools. That might only be one story, where we would have the ability through renovation to perhaps add capacity so that, you know, any expansion is going to cost money, but it'll cause less money if we can put more students on the same piece of land rather than having to find more land. So I guess that's a long way of saying that I understand and I accept the recommendations that we have, but could we look at possible rebalancing of the rubric in years going forward to address some of these needs?
We can look at that moving forward, and trust me, every conversation that we've had about this process, Mr. Croza has been at the table to discuss and advocate for capacity where it's needed. So we can look at modifying, and we can bring that back to you the next time, maybe in the fall sometime.
So I think that's a continuing conversation. I mean, a starting point is I think we should rename that sector from school choice. And given where we are, I think it should be the ACC. Assignment, capacity, and choice. Right? That's sort of what we're looking at. And I think putting assignment up there first, right? Assignment kind of deals with both capacity and choice, but really, you know, it falls on around that sort of bigger deal. And because I think having talked with Mr. Croza, I know that's already being evaluated. But I think to highlight, you know, the assignment and capacity issues over the choice would make sense. So for the fun of it, it's our ACC. And I'm the non-sports geek. ACC, assignment, capacity, and choice. ACC, yeah, because we're looking at new capacity, frankly. Yeah. Ms. Scott, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you so much. And I wanted to extend my gratitude for the team for listening to some of the suggestions that the board had. I think 1A is absolutely representative of what board members were sharing at the last week. So I do appreciate that. Wanted to just throw out a couple specific comments as I see. We had talked about the eyes not working so great. I'm really there. So, but looking at the Wendell Zebulon area with a new site location, I just wanted to again express that I believe the town would be very interested in having those conversations to start to be able to provide a collaborative process with working with the town. As we know, it's a sensitive area. They have been working really hard in their most recent updated plans of what they're doing with their downtown and grants that they've been working with over the last few years. So I know that's just a sensitive area, and I just hope we can have a nice collaborative process for that. But again, wanted to extend my gratitude for that. Really glad to see North Garner Middle School and Zebulon Middle School in option 1A. North Garner Middle School absolutely needs love, and the community certainly deserves a major renovation at their school as well. And trying to go through my notes. I did want to say that as we're talking about adding capacity at high schools, and we know what we have to work with, and forgive me for not knowing this, that's what I was trying to look up on my phone just right now. But I know that the state of North Carolina has facility guidelines for public schools in terms of space standards. And it's interesting to me that it appears that larger middle schools seem to be what the state is calling for. Am I right in terms of, am I reading that correctly? Like that, what is an average size middle school that the state would recommend or that we use? Could someone give me that answer?
We can tell you the sizes that we're planning our middle schools on, which is, what's that number? Is it 12, 14?
The largest, like 1240.
A large scale middle, we plan for around 1240. That's
Okay.
What I found in trying to look at what state expectations were is, for example, if you look at principal pay and the tiers, what's the highest tier and how many students they say. So, for example, for high schools, what do they cap out at, like 1,600 students, whereas our high schools may have 2,600 students.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's, do we have that, do we know that answer in terms of middle school principal?
I'll try to check it while we're continuing.
Okay, and the only reason why I throw that out there is as we're looking at school choice, particularly for middle schools, what a lot of people seem to find attractive with different schools of choice is that their middle school is smaller, that the middle school is a much smaller number of students, and that middle school is, everyone thinks that it's so scary. They think that they're sending their babies into middle school and they're going to, come out doing all sorts of terrible things. And, and it's not that. I think a lot of people just remember that how difficult that transition is for little humans to go through physically. But I think that our middle schools do a fantastic job of nurturing our students and helping them grow into young adults. But I did just want to say that's kind of an interesting thing to me that we're seeing a lot of push for, what's attractive to families as we try to retain them. And we see these smaller middle schools as part of K-8 schools of choice. So I just wanted to mention that. And again, I'm surprised that I know there's the number charts, the little charts that show that Northeastern Wake doesn't really need a middle school, but I just keep looking at Wakefield, Wake Forest High School, Heritage High School, which is capped, Roseville High School, and I see these very, very full high schools. So I hope that, again, this is not necessarily anything to do with what we're talking about right now. If we're not seeing a new school there, that maybe from a programming standpoint, we can look to see what sort of pathways or options to try to get folks interested in Millbrook Magnet School, or if Sanderson ever does become a magnet school, that we're trying to help be intentional about relieving some of the overcrowding at those schools, because they're kind of stuck. And that was all I had to add for that. Again, thank you for the changes in the plan.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Superintendent Moore, did you have some comments? It looked like.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, I'm not sure if this is what Ms. Scott is asking for, but when you look at the ranges for the state principal salary schedule, they don't necessarily designate levels. They just talk about the number of students in the school. And so over 1,600 is the largest designation. And then there's another designation for 1,000 to 1,600, but they're not designated by levels. And I think it's also why the district, because our schools tend to be larger, especially at the high school level, but even our typical elementary or middles have gotten larger, we do provide a salary differential and a local supplement for even principal pay in the county.
Ms. Cash?
So to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Scott was saying, I hope that as we move forward with a discussion about a northeastern Wake school, that we have some collaborative discussion over that. I have a feeling that we may have some differing thoughts about what the need is out there. I mean, I think Ms. Scott and I feel like the high school and the middle school numbers certainly point to one of those and not elementary, but I want to be sure we have a really good collaborative discussion on that, if possible. And I also want to say that, I had a little concern about only 15% of this going to the school choice or the new, whatever name we give it in the future. But if anybody hadn't had a chance to actually go through how Mr. Carozzo weighs that, I mean, he gave me an hour of his time to really go through that process, and it was so helpful and so reassuring to me on how we're looking at all the factors between magnets and school choice and capacity and assignment. It boggles your mind. It would be, if you have not had a chance to do that. And it reassured the fact to me that how closely you all are working together, and that makes me smile, which is so happy. But, not long ago, and I don't even know how to begin to answer questions to people sometimes, like I just got a question a few days ago from a group of parents that said, why don't you guys have some process to figure out how to renovate schools? And I'm thinking, you have not been listening, and how to begin to explain this to you, which I will. But, oh my gosh, the process is very good and very thought out. Just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you, Ms. Cash. I think that's an important thing to highlight. And when we can put together the scenario where we can maybe have a field trip to go sort of look at some schools, we might want to couple it with Mr. Carozzo and other discussions on this, because I think part of the value of visiting sites is, when you can see it with your own eyes, it makes a different impression than if we're just looking at a table of numbers. But I think seeing it with our own eyes can help us understand, okay, these are things that contribute to health and safety. These are things that contribute to building condition. But along with that, we need that discussion. These are things that contribute to the assignment capacity and choice. So maybe we can, for a future meeting, when we're able to pull together kind of the field trip, even if we can get it combined with our commissioners, because I'd love to have them come and see it with us, to couple that discussion of what does the physical plant look like, but what are these other needs that also have to go into the decision. I think that could be a very powerfully informative meeting. Mr. Haggerty.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. So I think as we kind of wind up some of the discussion, I wanted to bring up a couple questions that people have asked me about, and maybe that's something that could influence some of our direction in some future meetings. Mm-hmm. So, as we look at some of these specific projects, I know everybody has a particular school with a particular problem they'd love to see fixed, right? And so I guess I wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind stating and explaining to us, how, when you've talked about like the first factor, the building, the building conditions, how do things like work orders impact the assessment? So, for example, if one school is very aggressive about putting in work orders and one school is perhaps a little more passive, is that a thumb on the scale, or does that impact these scores at all?
So I won't speak for Mr. Slavic, but that is a component of what goes into this. I know they look at the metrics of that. And you make a great point. There are schools that do an excellent job of putting in work orders. Work orders, we need those. We need to be able to document that a request has been made. We've had recent examples of work that wasn't done, but maintenance didn't know about it. So we encourage that all the time. So they are an important component of everything that we do, not only to get the work done, but I think as importantly to document that there's a need.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. And if I could, then, Dr. Martin, maybe at a future meeting, we could kind of just talk for the benefit of the board. And I know Ms. Waters isn't here, but as a new member and even as newer members, what is the process? Like what happens when a work or order is put in? If Mr. Slavic or someone else could kind of walk us through that process. Oftentimes we hear about maybe a specific urgent need at a school for a maintenance project. Maybe it's a sewage or a plumbing issue, right? How are those addressed? Is that something that's eligible through one of our programs like PRIMP? Is that something that school administrators, know how to rise up in terms of how to raise it in terms of its urgency, or just something that can help us, help staff, and help others sort of better understand that process?
We
No, I
would
think
look
your
forward
point-
to that opportunity.
Yeah, I think your point is a good one, Mr. Haggerty, and I sort of had that as my related to my note here. A tutorial on the process, I think, is a very good idea. I think what we don't want is a takeaway from this meeting is, go submit 1,000 work orders to try to put your thumb on the scale. And I do know, having conversations with staff, that does get looked at. And if it's thumb on scale work orders, that may have some impact. Nobody's free of influence, but I think it does get looked at to say, this is thumb and scales versus really substantial needs. And I think we need to keep working at that to refine the process to make sure that it's used effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. I just wanted to add, too, per the conversation we had, that the facility needs request process is something that was refined. It was gone live again and shown to the public at the end of January. And area principals and superintendents were aware of this. We want to certainly encourage them all to be looking at that. That's found on our public website. And to please, if you do have a need that you feel is a legitimate need that falls into that PRIMP category, to please take a look at that and submit it for consideration, because it definitely could be a possibility.
And so if I understand you correctly, that means where a school has an urgent need, it may not have to rise up to the level that it's one of these that are chosen for our renovation projects. We might be able to go and address that immediately.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Correct.
Absolutely. And that really is my note here, is that to all the schools, right, as I noted, we should be doing 4 a year. 4 or 5 a year. We're not there. This list is way better than where we were, but we're still at a deficit. But to all of those schools and to families at those schools, I encourage you to work with your principal, identify the issues, submit those work orders, because we need to know about them. We now have the PRIMP process. Right? A lot of those projects never would have percolated up to the surface to actually get done. So we now have a mechanism to address some of those needs. So it's really important that PTAs, that staff work with their principals to sort of outline, here are the needs. No, we don't have enough funds to guarantee that we can fix everything, but we need to know it so we can begin to make plans. So that is just really important. Let us know. And I'm not saying let us as board members know. I'm saying let us as the system know. As board members, we can feed to channels, but it's most effective if work orders are submitted, if principals work through the PRIMP process so that we can get things addressed. And I also want to highlight that I think we're paying attention to now more than we were in the past, that if we do one of these projects, we're going to try to not let that all of a sudden, put the priority ranking, let it be a deficit against the priority ranking, because, we don't want to, put a Band-Aid on something, all of a sudden it looks better, but down the road, it's going to cost us even more. And I think the process of doing the multi-year evaluation of the building needs is going to help address that. So please get the information in there so we can move forward.
Great. So with that, why don't we move on to slide 14, which is the CIP.
And that's called a facility modification request, you said.
It was formerly called the facility modification request. The title of that has been refined to a facility needs request.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So this is our new school summary. on this particular slide. And in that slide, this is going to show you where our new schools are slotted in over the 7-year plan. Drawing your attention down to ESTBD number 1.
Douglas, are you on slide 14?
Yes, I'm on
Just
slide
in case
14.
you need the person who's
Okay,
online
could
to
you go to
resume.
slide 14, please? Great, thank you. So this, again, this is our new school summary. If you draw your attention down to ESTBD 1, that would be the slot where we've talked earlier this afternoon about Wendell Elementary School. Next slide, please. So in slide 15, we talk about our renovation summary. We've hit on North Garner Middle School, Lockhart, Brentwood. That high school renovation would be Athens Road High School, Athens Drive High School. We have Briarcliff Elementary School. Adams, of course, will be noted as Washington Elementary, Ligon Middle School, and then, of course, we'll have Zebulon Middle School at the bottom of this 7-year plan.
And again, that's presuming we go with the 1A, which is, I think, what I was hearing is consensus of this group.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the 1A approach. Next slide, please. In this slide, we show you the program requirement summary. There have been no changes made to this. This is exactly what we provided and shared with you all last Tuesday. Next slide.
By the way,
Sorry.
based on our last conversation, I think it's important to highlight how in 2026, 2027, the print numbers go up to 20 million a year. The second year, 2025 of the bond, goes up to 18. That category is real dollars to help address some of these needs.
Great point. Thank you, Dr. Martin.
And Dr. Martin, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the life cycle goes up as well. And
Absolutely.
so there's great opportunity, as we're doing now at some projects, to come bang for a buck.
To Mr. Strickland's point, the life cycle building goes up considerably in 24 to 35 million and then 40 respectively in 25.
Yep.
And that's very much, as he said, to help address the needs that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide, please.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Khan, just
Yes.
a quick question about the land component on slide 16.
Yes.
Is that land just for the projects that have been identified as our new school projects, or is that additional funding for other opportunities as they come along?
Those are dollars that are out there that are available for that particular category.
So the answer to your question is yes.
Yes.
So both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The shorter answer would have been yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure because, as we evaluated some of those projects, you noticed a lot of projects where we have needs, but we
Sure.
don't have land.
Good point.
But if we find the opportunity and we have the land, then perhaps that raises the project up in terms of its ranking and priority.
Right.
Right. This is our charge to Ms. Parker to find what you can.
Okay.
Dr. Martin, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask, is this, no. Is this already uploaded into Assembly, or will it be uploaded into Assembly at some point
Yeah.
soon? Okay,
I believe it is there, at least is the current version up?
The initial was there. The revised deck will be uploaded into
Yeah.
Assembly.
I sent it to Melissa
you
earlier.
The RISE deck is loaded.
It is loaded.
Refresh if you need to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So in this slide, we provide you the CIP total summary over the 7 years, and as indicated as well, no changes made to this slide from our meeting last Tuesday. Next slide, please. And then coming to conclusion here, wrapping this up, recommendation again would be option 1A, which would include Athens Drive High School. And with your consensus on that, we would then be bringing that to you for the official 2022 CIP presentation next Tuesday at the board work session. Any final questions or comments, with the goal, with the plan that if you are in agreement, that it would go that evening to the regular board meeting on agenda for approval. And with that, I would ask for any final comments or questions.
Questions or comments? I mean, I want to say thank you for, I think y'all have worked really hard in the last week, been very responsive to a lot of the tough discussion that we had at the last work session, and this is a continuing process. All right, I see no questions here at the table nor online. I don't think we need a motion. I think from what I'm seeing is pretty much consensus that we're good to have this come to the board at our next meeting. And go ahead, and I think we should be able to proceed with the vote so that we can get it to the commissioners and make sure we stay timely for getting the bond on the ballot.
Just confirming, we will have time in work session prior for any questions or review?
That would be my understanding.
Okay.
Right, with the understanding that, yes, this falls within the framework, that the understanding would be we have final comment question next Tuesday, Mr. Haggerty, with the intent to be seeking approval that evening, so that then it could go to commissioners.
Yeah, I think the timeline provides support, though, also for those board members who may be not online today or part of the conversation, depending on what happens on next Tuesday.
Yes.
Right, so as you all said, agenda, I think it makes sense to make sure it's a work session as opposed to, yeah, so I think we're good. Yeah. And obviously, this would go to action, I think, rather than consent.
Okay. Very good.
All right, so then you wanted, we've done sort of the prioritization follow-up. I think, is this also, do you have other information you want for the CIP process final
No,
review?
because the deck included everything that we've
two
done
pieces
over
together?
this for. It
Yeah.
was everything melded together. So we talked about the program assumptions, the legs, the cost model, the executive summary, the prioritization, the entire process that we've gone through over this 4 months.
Right, yeah, just wanted to clarify that there wasn't anything else.
Correct.
So that leads us to new business on the agenda. I think, we've already talked about the new business of the continuing business to continue to refine the prioritization rubric, to continue to build the understanding of what goes into that rubric. But are there other issues related to new business that anybody would like to bring up? Ms. Cash.
I'm still trying to get my head around what the magnet school that are needing some help with their building. I'm not saying that's the way I want to, but the fact that attractions to some of our magnet schools are almost zero, but it's a lot to do with facilities, and I still think that our magnet schools are the backbone of what we do. So at some point, I think it's a good way for us to see what our needs alignments are, is to look at the magnet schools that are literally not bringing in magnet applications, not because of program, because it may be a great program, but it may be a facility. I got 4 or 5 that come to mind, issues that are just, if you don't get them in the door because of what they see on the outside, we can't really sell the program to them. I would love to, there's some good measurements on that, I know. I would like to see that. It gives us another way of looking at the needs assessment. For me, it does anyhow.
No, I hear and appreciate that. I hear your focus toward magnet schools. I think, and I think that's really important. I think we've got to also look at I know people in your district have talked a lot about the Durant versus Abbott's Creek issue. Even though that's not a magnet school issue, it's dealing with the same challenge. And so I think that maybe I would encourage us to expand the discussion. I think your magnet school highlight is really a good and important one, but I think we've got a few of those settings, particularly when we have neighboring schools where there's a big differential.
Right.
That we need to pay attention to
And
as well.
thank you for saying that, because actually that is exactly what I was talking about. And I guess I think of Durant as an application school with a year-round program, but
And it historically was, but
Yeah.
not as much now. But
yeah. So, but it could. I mean, it can be, because
It could
people
be,
can
yeah.
apply there. So I kind of threw it in the magnet category, but similar, all of those. And
Yeah.
you have
If I could-
definitely.
Yeah, and if I could
Right.
just it's the lens that we use to look at our priorities for renovations or print projects or other things. And I think there's several lenses that have come out as part of the conversation. I think one lens that we may need to look at is in our most crowded areas. Where is there new schools for sure? Where are there renovations that could increase capacity in buildings that provide support? I think the magnet lens is another lens. I think the lens of even looking at municipalities and the oldest facilities within municipalities could be another lens. I mean, there's a number of lenses through which we can take a look at our priorities in our rolling 7-year plan. And I think the feedback that you guys are giving us and I'm trying to capture in my comments can help us with future presentations and information.
Well, and I think it's important. It's relevant. We clearly have to have this conversation for the CIP. But and Mr. Haggerty and I have talked about this a fair amount. Doesn't this need to be a leg of our strategic plan? Right, because a strategic plan absolutely is about what's learned in the schools and how they're supported with teachers. But if our facilities are not part of a strategic plan, and frankly, I don't mean to beat a drum, but maybe I do mean to beat a drum. If we're not renovating 5 schools a year, we're falling behind. How do we incorporate that strategically? It's going to need a plan, and it's going to need something other than the current. We're always running up against the county debt limit, because the county debt limit is not going to meet the needs that we currently have and are only going to grow.
Just to concur, we talk about a strategic plan, and we are one of the largest employers, one of the largest enterprises in the state, right? And how we spend our money, how we allocate our resources should be part of that strategic plan. And so even though we're talking about facilities and our capital improvement program today, what we've talked about is impacted by our base budget, our budget request. You look at one of the areas of expansion, we've talked about the maintenance operation formula alignment. Right? If we have a bare bones staff crew, and no offense to anybody working on that staff who's putting in long, hard hours, but if we don't have the same size of a team, the same size of a capacity comparable to the workload that other districts and other cities and other areas have, we can't keep the existing facilities up to the same quality they should be. And if we can't do that, then our maintenance and operation costs and our renovation needs are going to continue to grow every year. So it becomes, I think, part of our strategic vision and our strategic operation to make sure we have the essential employees in place to take care of our facilities. That's
Because if we don't do that, our 40-year life goes to 30-year life.
That's right.
Instead of pushing it to 50. Yeah, Ms. Cash.
Well, just in addition to that, I think our whole looking at the bus transportation and the school facilities and empty seats, it's our responsibility to figure out how to fill those empty seats. And if transportation is one of those, we need to think outside the box. I don't have a thought outside the box on that. And the facilities, because those are our ways of doing it. We have a lot of thought on that we need to do. So it's a big load. It's a big lift, but we've got to deal with it.
Well, to your point about the empty seats, right? We do need to look at transportation, but to our earlier point, we got to make those seats attractive seats to sit in.
Absolutely.
And so it's a combination of the mechanics of getting people to the seats, but we've got to make sure that they are attractive seats.
Absolutely.
All right. Any other items, points of
Dr.
discussion?
Martin, I just wanted to
Sure,
add
sorry.
a little bit.
Yes.
Sorry. No, I do very much agree, and I appreciate both you and well, all three, Mr. Haggerty and Ms. Cash also talking about the work environment and making sure that we're retaining and recruiting the employees that we need in maintenance and operations. Nate's presentation a few months ago just really stayed with me. I just thought it's incredibly important to continue looking at that. And I know it's more of an HR thing, but what can we do overall to make Wake County Public Schools the most attractive place for anyone to work, regardless of their career, if they're working directly with students or supporting as an education professional in some capacity. that we just continue to do that. I'd also like to, if there's a way to monitor or gauge traffic input, and as we know, a lot of schools have had more students using carpool from COVID. And then, of course, even for some of our magnet students and even non-magnet students, base students with fewer bus drivers, those longer bus rides have led to a lot of folks using Carline. And I know personally how long some of those are, either when I do have to pick up my own child or I get caught in the traffic. Like just throwing this out there, Heritage Elementary and Heritage Middle School, this is an ongoing thing. I know we're all familiar with it. And it's sort of been in this bubble of how can we solve that. But with those two schools having very close start times in the morning, it really, it's kind of dangerous around Rogers and Franklin. And understanding too that when we're looking at budget things and what we have to ask, our school buildings and maintaining them, I mean, that's one of it's all a fixed cost. I mean, regardless if you have 3,000 students at a school or 900 students at a school, there are so many fixed costs involved with that. And none of that is based on ADM. None of it, we don't get additional funding for that. We have to just make do with it. So I wanted to acknowledge how challenging that is. And the last thing is I asked for this before, so I'm just going to say again, I'd love to see maybe having a fine arts person on the facility, on the committee, as we're looking at the rubrics and where schools are. We have CTE, we have athletics. And the reason why I say fine arts is because all of our new high schools, I believe, are their auditoriums are being built with LED lights, I think. Their auditoriums are very upgraded. And when I'm looking at some of our older schools, they don't have those same parts. They don't have the same lights and soundboards and things. So I just wanted to toss that out there, that it might be worth having someone taking a look at that part of our buildings, at least particularly for our high schools, since they're comprehensive and they're supposed to have performing arts. And that was all I wanted to add. Thank you again.
Sure.
I totally second that.
Yeah.
We did talk about that before. I was going to say something, but.
And we do bring some of that in, but I think your point is well taken, that a seat at the table is different than a seat who talks to people who are at the table. So, yeah. All right. Continuing work. This committee stays active. 3 months forecast. Any things you want to highlight?
Yeah, a few things to highlight. So a couple of things. Looking forward to the April 19th board meeting. We'll, of course, be back with you all at the work session to present the formal CIP for 2022.
I think that microphone is muted.
And sorry about that. So work session again at the April 19th work session for the 2022 CIP review. We'll also, that evening, you will have the E51 GMP number 4 on the board agenda that evening. Looking forward 1 month to the May facilities, you will have the presentation of the schematic design for Swift Creek Elementary School. And then following that, at the next board meeting on May 17, on the agenda that evening would be Swift Creek Elementary School schematic design.
All right. Any questions about the upcoming work? Hearing none. I believe that concludes the business for today's meeting. Thank you again to staff. This has been a good, robust, multiple discussions in work sessions, and I think where we're landing is at a very strong place, given the constraints that we have to work in. So, just conclude. Keep working at it, because we should be doing 5 a year. And let's just keep working at trying to understand, right? It's strategic planning. How do we make sure that we're not just taking care of barely getting by on the needs of today, but are we, doing what we need to do to make sure the facilities of our school system, as well as everything else about our school system, stays strong long into the future. And thank you, and we will adjourn today's meeting.
Thank you very much, all.